Hello, this is Mike from Dimensional Walking. And today we're going to talk about some stories from the vault. We have many stories based on interviews and some of the experiences that Rainbow and I have had over the many years. So these are going to be stories that were based on interviews with Native Americans. When I lived in New Mexico, I lived in New Mexico for many years and did a lot of research besides running the New Mexico UFO Paranormal Forum there. So I was able to, like I say, interview many Native Americans, and I have quite a few really, really interesting stories. I'm going to talk about three of the stories today. The first one, well, let me do a little bit of a side note here, a sidebar. When I dealt with the Native Americans and discussed things with them, I love the Native Americans. I've spent a lot of time with Native Americans over the years. Rainbow basically was taught by a shaman, medicine ways, so she's very versed on it. But most of mine were interviews with Native Americans. And one of the things, of course, was always a challenge was the trust factor. I guess after hundreds of years of white folks being untrustworthy with the Native Americans and all the basic atrocities that were done against them from the beginning of our arrival here in North America, it's a tough road many times to communicate. And it probably took, in many cases, it took months, maybe years to communicate with the Native Americans, where they could believe me and I could believe them in many ways. So anyways, so the first story I'm going to talk about is a Navajo teacher and her adventure. I guess we'll call it adventure or observation of a Sasquatch. And so back, I guess this is, probably about 15 years ago now, I talked to this Native American teacher, and I got to know her through a friend. And anyways, she told me this story that she took her students to a field trip, and it was probably about 45 minutes north of Shiprock, which Shiprock is in New Mexico, if you don't know, and it's on the Navajo reservation. And so she was taking them to a place, a little cave, that her teaching aide, who also went on the trip with them, had seen some petroglyphs there that they want to show their students. So that's what their mission was, to go find the cave and go look at these petroglyphs. So it took about 45 minutes, like I said, to get there. They got there and they had to walk probably about 15 minutes, I think she said, on a small path to get to this little cave area, which was kind of a cluster of rocks, big rocks on a hill, and some big boulders, I think she said. And in there was a small cave. You could walk in it. It was probably, you could walk back about 50 feet or so, she said. And the cave continued, but you really couldn't walk in it very easy. You would have to crawl, etc. But the petroglyphs were located pretty close to the entrance. So anyways, they got there and they had their little flashlights. And I think these are 4th and 5th graders. They had their flashlights, and some of them had the the lights on their hats, or I guess, I think she said hats. I was going to say helmets, but I don't think they had helmets, but the little hats. And so anyways, they put that on and they got in there and started looking around. And all of a sudden there was a huge commotion outside of the cave. And I didn't tell you, but the teaching assistant went in first, and then the kids, and then the regular teacher, she was at the back of the line to get in. So she was closest to the entrance to the cave. And so when she heard this commotion, which was a lot of kind of screaming and kind of chill screaming and bawling, and like some animals were getting kind of killed, etc. She said, she kind of said, "Whoa, what's all that?" And she told everybody to stay in the cave, and she was going to kind of check it out. So she kind of got out of the cave and kind of looked up the trail, and they're kind of at a distance at this point, even though the noise and the commotion was very loud. She saw, I guess she thought at first glance, it was a huge person carrying something under their arms. And she couldn't really tell from the distance until it got closer. And then she realized this was not a human. This was some kind of a big, hairy creature carrying two, looked like full-grown sheep. And of course, they were the ones that were making all the noise and bawling and screaming and carrying on. That kind of created the attention. And then she had another thought. Well, this creature was a Sasquatch. She was quite sure of it now. I mean, she hadn't personally seen a Sasquatch, but she had, being on a reservation, people talk about Sasquatches and dogmen and all these other forest type creatures. So it wasn't like, this is something completely brand new to her. But to see a Sasquatch in daylight carrying sheep was pretty incredible. So anyway, she saw this, she pulled back into the cave, didn't tell them. Only thing she told them is everybody get down and be quiet and don't say anything. So she kind of got back into the cave, she said, and the Sasquatch, she could kind of still see it as it was coming down the path. And as it passed, it kind of looked towards the cave, gave it a quick glance, and then just kept on going. Didn't change its pace, just kept on going. And the sheep are still going wild and crazy. But she confirmed again, it was a Sasquatch. It was a huge Sasquatch. She thought she's easily over 7 foot, and was carrying these two full-grown sheep, which, were huge in their own right. But he had no problem carrying both of these, one under one arm and one under the other. And he was going down this path. And of course, the kids were starting to get upset because the noise was now very intense because he was very close. She didn't tell him what it was. She didn't tell him what was going on, but the noise was just deafening. And she said that once it passed, she kind of poked her head out of the cave again and then saw the backside of it with the sheep, the backside of the sheep, backside of the Sasquatch. And then they moved into a wooded area and everything went quiet. She said there was no more noise. She didn't know what happened. She thought about it. She said, for some reason, one thing came to her mind, that it walked into some kind of a portal and it was gone. It was completely gone. Now, she can't confirm the portal thing, but that's what went through her mind, she said. So anyways, so the kids, of course, were all upset. She went back in. She didn't tell them it was a Sasquatch. She just said there was I think she said a big man or something was carrying some sheep that were very, very unhappy and blah, blah, blah. And so, but they didn't want to stay around. I don't even know if they saw the petroglyphs at all. She said, yeah, we got to go. Something doesn't seem to be right. She didn't want to alarm the children anymore since she was their teacher. So they got out of there as quick as possible and went home. And that was pretty much the end of that story. But what is so unusual about it, first of all, is it was a daylight sighting of a Sasquatch, a close-up one, number one. Number two is, even though I had heard that, farmers and ranchers had complained about sheep throughout New Mexico, because there's a lot of sheep up in the hills. They do a lot of grazing of sheep. And they had complained, there was complaints that at night they would hear the same thing, sheep screaming and hollering, carrying on. And then during the day, there would be a couple of sheep that are gone. When they woke up, they never could see anything take it. But I think one or two people actually did tell me that they did see some partial footprints or footprints of something that looked like could have been a Bigfoot, or they call it a Bigfoot, or I call it a Sasquatch. So anyways, but the strange thing was it was a daylight sighting. And I think the Sasquatch knew that they were there, or there was somebody in that cave. There's no doubt in my mind, because he did give that glance over there. So anyways, that was story number one. Story number two, we're going to call this one Police Being Chased by an 8-footer. Okay, so This story came to me via a dispatcher from the Gallup Police Department. This person came to one of our presentations in Albuquerque. And after the presentation, I don't even remember what the presentation was, this person approached me and told me this story. So I'm going to relay this story to you. I thought it was a pretty interesting story. So this was probably about 10 or 12 years ago, if I've got my math straight here on when I was back in Albuquerque until I moved to Utah and now Oregon. So anyway, she approached me after this meeting and she was telling me about this incident that happened on a very clear, bright day. I'm not sure why she said that, but it was during the day. And it's if you've live in New Mexico, there's many, many days that are clear and bright. Anyway, she got a distress call from an officer. Actually, it was two of them in a car, and they were driving. I guess they were driving back south on Highway 491. If you're familiar with the area, there's a highway called 491 that comes north out of Gallup, New Mexico. And anyways, they were traveling south, and they claimed they were being chased by something. It was big, and it was traveling well over 70, maybe 80 miles an hour or more. They were traveling well over 80, and it was seemed to be gaining. That was all she heard at first. And then they ended up coming back to the police station to tell the rest of the story. And this is the rest of the story. So anyways, they were driving probably, I guess a half an hour or 45 minutes before they got to the police station. They were driving north on interstate, or it wasn't interstate, it was a state highway 491 out of Gallup, going to the north of that into the reservation. Although I think Gallup is in the reservation there. I think it's in the Navajo reservation. I think it's the southern end of the reservation, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways, so they were driving down the road, and suddenly somebody coming in the opposite direction, going south, pulled over and jumped out of the car and flagged them down, and basically told them there's something on the road, up the road about a mile, a large something standing on the road, bent over, looking at something on the ground. And they said it was huge. It didn't look right. It didn't look like a normal animal, like a wolf or anything, although it had features sort of a wolf. So anyways, they kind of looked at, the two officers looked at each other. The people didn't say anything else. They kind of got back in their car and they headed quickly south. And the officers, I guess more out of curiosity than anything, decided to go up and see what they were talking about. So they got up the road, and it was, she said that it was actually ended up being almost 2 miles up the road, although maybe this animal or whatever it was had moved up a little bit. But anyways, they saw the creature saw them. It was huge. It was really, really big. And they didn't quite know what it was. At first they thought it was a wolf, but it stood up. It was down on the ground on all fours, and it stood up and took a look at them. They passed it by. They actually went by it, and they stopped, and they got out and they looked back at it. And then the creatures saw them basically, or recognized whatever they were looking at the ground. It got up and looked at them and stared at them for a while and just stood there. Sort of like, I think they describe it like a coyote would. If you've ever been around coyotes, they'll sit and stare at you for a while. They usually don't do anything, but they'll just look at you. Well, this creature, whatever it was, and one of the guys actually thought it was a shape-shifting skinwalker, and the other one thought it was a dog man or something like that because of its head and its face looked very much like a huge wolf, but a much thinner snout. So anyways, this creature gets up, huge. Now they're thinking it's 8 foot, easy, 8 foot tall, and it's standing up on its hind legs and looking at them. So they get back in the car, and I'm not sure why they end. I think because they turned the car around initially, They were going north and they turned it south. So they decided they're going to go by it again and see what it was, but they're going to be in a car this time, not outside the car. They're going to be in a car. So they drove by it, and the thing is standing here still looking at them, and it's starting to come towards the car. So they take off. And said, well, in their mind, they're thinking, well, this, we'll be able to get away. This ain't going to be a big deal. They didn't even thinking about it was going to follow them. So they're going, and he said, well, maybe 45, 50 miles an hour. And all of a sudden they look in the rearview mirror, and here this thing is coming. First of all, it's on 2 legs running, and then it goes to 4 legs and it's running, and it's gaining on them. And they're going 45, 50, and then they're going 60, 70. And he said, finally, we were going 80 miles an hour. It was still in the rearview mirror. And finally, they're completely freaked out. Completely. They've never seen anything like this ever. They've been out there. They've heard stories, about, shapeshifters and some other type of Sasquatch, but no creature chasing them at 80 miles an hour or more. The only thing they think that saved them was that they got closer to the city limits of Gallup, and then there was a lot more cars and there was a lot more people, etc. And all of a sudden, they remember the one guy remembers seeing in the rearview mirror that the creature just took a quick veer to the quick right, and it went into some bushes, and that was really it. So they finally get back. Of course, they got back to the police station, told their story to the dispatcher and a couple other officers there. These were very reliable officers. I think she said they were on the police force for many, many years, and they were some of the most reliable. They weren't drinking. They were just shaken to the bone. It was the most incredible story. She never forgot it. I'm not really too sure why she ended up coming and telling me, but I guess she just felt, we always had some Native American folks who would come periodically and sit and listen to our stories, and apparently she had heard that from them, that we were decent people, and come and tell your story to Mike or some of the other people there. But she only told it to me, and I wasn't going to ever use her name, or I wasn't going to even use the names of the patrolmen at all. But the story, I believe, it's an incredible story, and these 2 officers were completely shaken by it. So that was story 2. Okay, let's talk about story 3. So I had spent quite a few years when I probably about 8 or 9 years, I was a general manager of a warehouse there in Albuquerque, and I had the great pleasure of being a general manager, and I was the general manager over a very special employee, I'll call him. And he was a great grandson of a very famous war chief and medicine man. And I'm not going to give you the name of the war chief or the medicine man or his name at all. I'm going to keep that private. He said I could share stories in the future if I wanted to, and that's what I'm going to do. He said, but he didn't want to have his name out there, etc. But I did check before I even, would sit down with him. And this took a long time. He worked for me for about 3 years, and it took me a while to gain his trust for other reasons I told you before. And finally, I felt some of the stories he told me initially, I was quite unsure of. This one I felt pretty comfortable with. So anyways, I'm going to tell you the story. I won't be able to go into all the detail. There was a lot more detail because it happened over a series of probably 4 or 5 half-hour interviews during lunch. When we weren't working, I would buy him lunch or something and come and sit in my office, and he would tell me some really cool stories. So anyways, this was kind of a general collection and some of the summary information I wanted to tell you. So anyways, he would talk to me about these different entities that lived on the reservations, on his reservation. And his reservation, I will tell you, was in the northern part of the United States. It wasn't in New Mexico. It was north of New Mexico. And he would talk about these different cryptids, such as Sasquatch, Dogmen, forest people, And he would tell me, you know, some interesting things in quite extensive detail. And one thing he would say that only the medicine men would be able, and normally the lead shaman would be the only ones that were able to communicate with these forest type peoples. They wouldn't allow anybody else to do it because it was pretty touch and go. And they didn't want to disrupt the harmony of nature, I guess. So anyways, they would communicate with them telepathically. They would also do sign language with them. And they would share food with them. They would share food, say, with the Sasquatch. And the Sasquatch were the ones that they did most of the communication with, okay? And the Sasquatch would share medical type information, herbs and stuff with them. Sometimes the Sasquatch would bring them game and food. Sometimes the wee people would come and ask for food, the little people. They would come and ask for food. And I had that confirmed by a couple other Native Americans that told me the same thing. They would come in the fall of the year and ask for food. So anyways, there was quite a bit of interaction. Now, the thing that I came away from this was, I thought the most interesting fact of all that he told me was that since he was he was a medicine man, this gentleman I knew or worked for me. And he said, of course, he would communicate with other reservations around the country. I mean, they would go to powwows and they would just talk to each other basically at their level. And they would say that he came to the conclusion, he was quite confident in telling me this, that every reservation in the country probably had a little corner of their reservation that was set aside for these forest people. And only would they go in there if they were invited. And typically only people that were ever invited to go in there would be the shaman and the medicine man. Nobody else was allowed to go in there. They would protect it with their life because they felt so strongly that these beings had to be protected. And it was really, really, really important to them. So anyways, I thought that was absolutely amazing to believe. Oh, and he said that some of these reservations, some of the larger ones, would actually have thousands of acres that were set aside that they never went into. They were just protected. They would go around the perimeter and make sure nobody would enter. And they would protect it with their life, he said. And I think the forest people and the Sasquatch and the dogmen, they really, really appreciated it. And it's sort of, it was important for them to do that. And I think again, the Sasquatch and the forest people really appreciated that. Anyways, I just thought that was absolutely amazing. So anyways, that's it. That's all I have today. Again, our website is truthseekerforum.com. And of course, our YouTube channel is Dimensional Walking, Paranormal Journey. And our email is dimensionalwalking@gmail.com. Appreciate you sending us emails, ask us questions. We answer every email. Tell us what you like to hear and see. We've been doing this, combined probably 80 years of experience in the world of paranormal and Sasquatch, UFOs, et cetera, et cetera. And if you like us, please like us. And please subscribe, of course. And that's about it. So happy trails until we meet again. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.